Stuart takes up painting, but is it for the art or the models? Spin City on ITV2 now.
Today we're in the Hampshire village of Damerham, just a few miles from the market town of Fordingbridge. Here you'll find an ancient privy, some appealing alpacas, and a lot of apples at the annual Apple Day celebration.
2, 3.
You lost.
Damerham, with a population of just under 500, is one of the western downland villages on the borders between Hampshire, Dorset and Wiltshire. It's mentioned in the Domesday Book, but there have been people living in and around Damerham since before records began.
The name Damerham is said to mean the place of the judges, and it was in the Domesday Book under that name, with, strangely, a population much the same number as it is today.
Robin Robbins has been digging up some of Damerham's history, quite literally, in her back garden.
It started really with some clay pipes, which we were interested in, and when we tried to date them, we found out they were 17th century. And we've found pottery dating from the 20th century right back to the 13th. This place would have been a field, and in the days before dustmen, then people just used to take everything, human excrement, dead cats, whatever, all tipped out into a heap and then spread on the fields to fertilise the fields.
But there's one part of Damerham's past that Robin is less keen to find.
Somewhere in the village of Damerham there is supposed to be a walloping great big bomb. There were actually 2 that were jettisoned by a German plane as it was returning. And one of them was found a long while after the war, and it's absolutely enormous and was christened Big Bertha. And everybody believes that somewhere there's another one. So I'm going to dig very carefully, because you never know.
Damerham is still making history today, with a village event that started only 6 years ago, but is now an important local tradition.
Apple Day means a fun day out for all the family, and it's a great day for the villagers. It's a community thing. It helps them to bond and meet and also have fun. And of course we're celebrating apples, which is wonderful, and all the things that it can be done with an apple.
I think he's had enough.
Fun it may be, but without apples, there would be no Apple Day in Damerham. And that's where Chris and Shirley Stanford come in. They grow 35 different varieties of English apples in an orchard they started when they moved to the area nearly 40 years ago.
And I've planted all the apple trees myself. Some cookers, some eating apples. And we've rather gone in for older varieties, which you can't buy anymore, like this one, which is Annie Elizabeth, and which I remember from my granny's garden many years ago. It's particularly nice because it's such a lovely colour, and also in the spring it has the most wonderful deep crimson blossom, much darker than most of the varieties you see. You think of apple blossom pink, but this is apple blossom crimson for Annie Elizabeth. When you think your apples are going to be ready, you have to give them a little test, and you just try twisting it, just like that, and it should come away quite easily. Yes, that one is ready. We've got a beautiful cooking apple here. When I've polished it up, it will be a most lovely colour.
Chris and Shirley will be taking 25 different varieties to Apple Day in Damerham this year, and they have to look their best.
These are going to be exhibited tomorrow at the Damerham Apple Fair, and they all have a bit of bloom on them until they've been rubbed off with a wet cloth and then dried, and generally they then acquire a sheen which makes them much more attractive. Well, it's certainly healthy eating. I think that's the main thing, and it's free, isn't it? Once you've bought the apple tree and planted it, then you have this wonderful fruit for nothing.
Apple Day will be held in the village hall, just a stone's throw from where one of the most dramatic events in Damerham's history took place in the middle of the 19th century.
A child records that she crept upstairs to get the washing down, and she looked out of one of the tiny windows through the thatch and saw flames running up the thatch, and ran downstairs to her mother and said, "There's a fire." And mother said, "Take the baby and run." And this little girl took the baby and ran, and she hid under the bridge in the village where the river flows. And the whole street was burned down. 35 families were made homeless before evening. And the little girl was eventually found still clutching the baby and terrified. Everybody thought that she'd been killed in the fire, but in fact nobody was harmed. But if you can imagine, it's the entire street and 2 half streets that were destroyed.
Since the fire, there isn't much thatch in Damerham itself, but there's plenty in the surrounding villages to keep Nigel Turton busy.
I became a thatcher because I was heading for the City of London, where my father had a business. And then one day I took a big gulp of air and I said, "Dad, I don't want to work in the city." Once I made the decision to become a thatcher, it was quite a difficult job to get into. I struggled to find a masterman who would give me a 5-year training. It's a 5-year apprenticeship. Eventually I found one in the forest, the New Forest, who said he'd give me a week's trial for the princely sum of £30 a week. Generally these cottages are all individual. You know, if you look in the village, every house is slightly different, or very different sometimes. We use 2 main materials in this area, waterweed and combed wheatreed. If it's got comb wheatreed on there, the councils like you to keep comb wheatreed on there, and the same goes for waterweed. The job satisfaction when you come to a roof, they're very tired, they're covered in moss, they can be almost leaking or leaking. And then when we leave, it's got a golden roof. Hopefully it's all crisp and pristine, and the satisfaction when you drive away is second to none.
No one knows for sure if this little building at the end of Carolyn Andrews' garden was thatched when it was first built, probably more than 500 years ago. It's thought to be the oldest privy in Hampshire.
Nobody's really been able to say exactly how old it is. I'd like to think it was a similar age to the house, which is sort of 16th century. It was originally just a cob wall, and it had a tin roof on it. That was changed by the lady that owned the house before us, and she thatched the privy, I suppose, to keep more in line with the house when that was thatched at the same time.
It's the afternoon before Apple Day, and the chairman of Damerham and District Horticultural Society, Nick Locke, is busy finding ingredients for his wife Kareen's culinary contribution.
In fact, I've made 2 apple pies, one to give to sell and the other one as part of the competition. Not that I'm competitive, but it's quite fun to get lots and lots of different entries. The other thing that I've been doing is I've been making a recipe involving apples for part of the sample table. The public come in and they sample them, and if they like them, they'll buy the recipes. Usually they buy the whole set.
While Kareen's busy with her baking, down at the church, Ros Jones is also putting in a bit of elbow grease. It's her turn for the church cleaning rota.
We find a terrific amount of bat poo everywhere. I have to scrub it off the belfry windowsills with a broom and then collect it all up afterwards. I'm always hoping to find insects, such as deathwatch beetles or big spiders, because I think they're fascinating. But so far, I've found plenty of dead wood lice, but not much else. Treble's going. She's gone. It's a privilege to think that I'm one of the many people who have loved it and cared for the church. And I also particularly feel proud that I'm a bell ringer, because some of the bells are very old. The tenor was cast in 1666, and people have been ringing that ever since, and I ring it myself, so that's a great privilege, I think.
As the bells ring out over Damerham, back at the village hall, the Apple Day preparations are almost complete. This kind of event is important for a village like Damerham.
It keeps villages together. It also helps villages to bond as a community, because a lot of villages now are dying as communities. You know, they use it for a place to live, and then they go off to work. But to actually have something that a village can get involved in, and it helps to keep that village together. Apple Day is particularly good at that, because it is actually very labour intensive.
In the Western Downlands, a few miles from Fordingbridge, on the borders of Hampshire, Dorset and Wiltshire, the village of Damerham spreads along both sides of the River Allen. The river dried up again this summer, just as it has for the past 3 years. But when wildlife writer Robin Robbins first came here, things were different.
The first 5 years we lived here, it didn't dry up at all. But the last 3 years, it's dried up in the summer, and it comes back again once the water table rises. If we get a lot of rain at this time of the year, it'll take about a fortnight for the springs to start to flow again. In the winter, it comes up really high, in fact floods the bottoms of our gardens and into the meadow on that side. And then it slowly goes down in the summer, and if it's a really hot summer, it disappears altogether like this, which is sad. I miss the noise. I just hate not being able to hear the water run.
It's an important day for the village. It's Apple Day, a relatively new tradition started just 6 years ago. But the Damerham and District Horticultural Society have made it a firm favourite in the village calendar. Kierine Locke is on her way to the village hall with her entry in the apple pie competition. Chris and Shirley Stanford are already there. They've brought 25 different varieties of apples from their orchard for people to see. And Chris has polished every one to perfection. In the kitchen, the lunches are almost ready. And outside, there's freshly squeezed apple juice to wash it down with. Damerham's only surviving pub, the Compass Inn, used to brew its own beer, as landlord James Kidd found out when he took over 11 years ago.
We've got an old brew tower, which dates back to the origins of the pub, I think. As far as we can tell, it goes back to the 1680s, which is the origin of the pub as well, but not absolutely sure on that one. They would have brewed a 5-barrel run, a barrel being 36 gallons. That's a brewer's barrel. So somewhere, a few pints would have had to have been consumed in order to use up what they were brewing. I think possibly because the beer was actually safer than the water at the time. Water the quality wasn't good, so I think maybe they thought by drinking beer it was better for them. I like having it there, but it's sort of almost in the way now. You can't do anything with it as such. It's just sat there, as I suppose, as a monument to a bygone time, really. I don't suppose we'll ever be able to brew with it again, but we just keep it there as a memory, I suppose, really.
Up until the latter part of the 20th century, most of the jobs in and around Damerham would have involved hard labour. There were 5 farms in the high street alone. Nowadays, many of the residents travel to the nearest towns to work. But close to the village, Alf Abbott is still following the old ways of the woods.
Well, I've been up here cutting hazel shanks to take home and store ready for making sticks. And the shanks that I have cut today will not be used for at least a 12-month, possibly 2 years, to give them time to season. People come to me and say, oh, I'm not old enough to have a stick, but you don't have to be old. A stick is an aid when you're walking over rough ground. It helps you up and down banks. It's like a third leg and it's a friend. If you're crossing a stream, you can check the depth of the water. It doesn't go over the top of your rubber boots or whatever you like. So a stick is an essential aid in walking in the country. Like all things that are arty, you do put a lot in because it's a personal thing. And you rub your hands down it as though you were caressing a woman. And I'm sorry, but it's just the feel of the whole thing. It's a lovely piece of workmanship. And I do have favourite sticks, and when I sell them, I don't like to see them go.
At the village hall, Apple Day is in full swing.
3, 2, 1.
You lost.
Well, this is a fairly easy one to identify. It has all the distinct features of Bramley seedling.
And apple expert Harry Baker is being kept busy.
And the later you leave it, the more... Well, I'm retired fruit officer from Wisley. I retired about 12 or 13 years ago now. My job at Wisley was looking after the fruit collection. And I'm here today to help with apple identification. Although I'm retired, people still ask me to come along and help to name the local apples. This is an interesting one. It's called Wyken Pippin or Wicken Pippin. It comes from Wyken near Coventry. And actually it goes back to the 1700s. It's thought it was introduced from the Netherlands in the early 1700s. It's a lovely apple, very aromatic flesh, and it's rather distinctive. It's always yellow, a golden yellow, with these lenticel spots. These are the kind of things I use, all these characteristics, to identify the apple. The depth of the eye, the size of the eye, the size of the stalk, the length of the stalk, the depth of the stalk cavity, the colour, and that sort of thing. You usually get your thumb.
Harry's had a variety of crabapple named after him in honour of his achievements in all things apple.
Out from the stalk cavity.
In Damerham, there's another monument to a local hero. It's on land owned by James Bowskill.
We're standing in front of a memorial to 2 General Ercout's uncle and nephew, and the memorial column was built by the widow of the nephew, i.e. sometime after the famous general had died. He fought with Clive of India, which will mean something to some people. In the days when the British Army fueled themselves on the move and lived on pillage.
James has built a worldwide reputation as a pond builder, and his own land is now a showpiece for his work.
I've learnt by the various means, mainly using plastic liners, how you can get water into what would previously be regarded as an absolutely impossible place to have one. And this has generated so much interest that we've ended up having the National Festival of Ponds and Lakes, and people actually come from a great deal further, including South Africa, America, places like that. I think the first time I remember being tremendously interested, I was about 10, where I lived as a boy in Leicestershire, where we had a pond in the field by the house, and for some reason my father was a very good and very interested gardener, and one of my earliest recollections is creeping around in a little boat, throwing lilies attached to bits of brick, because that's how you did it then. And shouts from the bank, more out, more back, you know, and telling this story to me once to my son, I had mutter under his bed. Nothing changed in about 40 years. I was doing exactly the same for him last week. So true.
While James works on his pond, his wife Jenny has another interest.
They're alpacas. They're from the camelid family. And they actually live in Chile, in Peru, in the Andes. And that's where they like it here, because they're high up. And they've got their shelter up there and they feel secure. But these were bred by the Peruvians, by the Incas, for their wool, to keep warm. They remind me of South America, which I love. And they don't look out of place in this country. Well, they've got lovely big eyes, wonderful big eyes. And they really think. It's the first thing I look at in the morning when I open the curtains, to see where they are.
Up at the village hall, Apple Day is going well.
I'm very, very pleased. We had a lot of people come. The lunches are going down very well and lots of people playing silly games. It's fantastic. And the weather has held off. We did think it might rain, but no, so far so good. So yeah, I'm really, really pleased.
One of the highlights for visitors is a trip around the corner to Damerham's newly created community meadow.
For many years, this was just a very neglected bit of land. After they built all the houses here, it was taken out as a field and not really used, except occasionally. And so it became very overgrown, and then it was thought it'd be nice to have it as a bit of amenity land for the village. The ambition in 10 years is for this sort of hogweedy-dominated grassland to have gone and turn it back into something like a more flower-rich meadow and also an orchard. And people will be able to walk in here and walk through, and it'll be absolutely fantastic with flowers and butterflies. And there'll be a bit of river with, you know, insects and dragonflies on the river, and a seat that's going to go in here for people to sit and enjoy it, really. So that's basically what it's about. And apples, hopefully lots of apples, lots of nice apples.
There may be just 7 apple trees in the community orchard now, but the hope is that fruit from here will become part of Damerham's annual Apple Day celebration.
You wouldn't get this in London, would you, Jean?
No.
London would not be any good.
Not for sit.
It's simple, wholesome, happy fun, and nobody's been horrible to anybody.
3, 2, 1. Oh. 2 again! Oh, tough.